Now let's talk about software instruments. For this chapter, I'm going to create a new empty project song file. And I'll choose a software instrument track. So to talk about working with software instruments in GarageBand, we need to talk about MIDI. As I mentioned in the previous chapter, MIDI, which stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, is a method for electronic instruments to communicate with each other and with computers and various other devices that speak the MIDI language. MIDI instruments are often referred to as MIDI controllers because they're used to control MIDI software such as GarageBand. Now, when you sit down and play a note on a real honest-to-goodness piano, let's say you play middle C, you're actually causing a felt hammer to strike a string in the piano, which resonates to produce a sound. When you play a MIDI keyboard, however, pressing the C triggers a sample or recording of middle C that's been saved on your computer. There are no hammers or strings involved. Nothing in the controller itself creates any sounds. As you've already seen, GarageBand contains scores of software instruments, all of which can be played using a MIDI keyboard. Software instruments are really just a large collection, sometimes called a bank, of individual audio files that mimic the sound of a real instrument. In some cases, a software instrument bank is comprised of samples that have been recorded from a real instrument. For example, the grand piano sound was made by recording the individual notes of an old grand piano note by note. Other software instruments, like many of the horns and wind instruments, were made completely electronically. In any case, when you record yourself playing a MIDI instrument in GarageBand, no audio is actually recorded. What you're really recording is a series of MIDI messages. It's kind of like you're making the scroll of punched paper you'd find in an old player piano. The MIDI message of each note tells the MIDI device, in this case GarageBand, what note to play, but also sends information like how long the note was held, how hard you pressed the key, whether you were pressing a sustain pedal, and lots of other information. When you play back your recording, GarageBand just reads the info you saved and plays the appropriate samples. The cool thing about this is that since you haven't actually recorded any audio, you can pick other instruments to play your performance after you've recorded it. For example, let's say you recorded yourself playing the Steinway grand piano instrument, and you're happy with your performance. But a week later, you decide you really prefer the sound of the classic electric piano for the part you recorded. You don't have to go back and try to recapture your performance by playing it again with a different instrument. All you need to do is select your track and change the instrument that plays the data. We saw how this worked in a previous chapter when I showed you how you could take a software instrument drum loop and have the notes played by a piano or guitar instead. Now, in case you don't have a MIDI keyboard, GarageBand does come with this on-screen music keyboard that appears whenever you create a new song with a software instrument track. Now, there are actually two types of keyboards here: musical typing, which we see by default, and the regular keyboard. Let's start with the regular keyboard. Really, either of these on-screen keyboards are a poor substitute for a real MIDI keyboard, but they may work in a pinch if you need to add a single note or two here or there. The keyboard will play the sounds of whatever instrument is currently selected in your track. The neat thing here is that depending on where you click, you'll get a slightly different sound. Clicking lower on the keys plays the note harder or with more velocity, as it's called in the MIDI world. Clicking higher plays the note with a lower velocity. If I need to play a lower or a higher tone, I can click the triangles on either side of the keyboard to lower or raise the view of the keyboard by one octave at a time. This blue highlighted area shows you which part of the keyboard you're currently on. You can also just drag in this area too, to drag to the octave you need. If you have the space on your screen, you can also increase the size of the keyboard window about 10 octaves by dragging out. You can also make the keys larger by dragging the lower right-hand corner down into the right. Go back to the default size. So again, when I play a note on a MIDI keyboard or on an on-screen keyboard, what I'm really doing is triggering a sound file to play. The problem with playing the on-screen keyboard is that you have to play by moving your mouse around and clicking at exactly the right time, and it does limit you to playing only one note at a time, which might be okay if you're just playing, say, a snare drum part or some other single note part. To make things a little bit easier, we can try switching to the other virtual keyboard feature called musical typing. This displays a window that lets you play notes on your Mac's keyboard. You can see here that the letters on the keys tell you which notes they'll play. Typing an A plays a C. I can also click it. Actually, we're pretty low in the octaves right now. We can drag up a little bit. And typing a T plays an F sharp. And I'm playing that on my Mac's keyboard. And they're laid out in such a way here that they mimic an actual piano keyboard, at least as well as a computer keyboard can. Notice that the black notes are all in the line of letters above the white notes. So if I press A for a C note, and I want to play C sharp, I press W. which is up and to the right of the A on the keyboard, kind of like the C sharp on a piano keyboard is also up and to the right of the C. Musical typing is a nice feature to have. For one thing, you can play simple melodies much easier than by clicking your mouse. It's kind of low. I'm going to move up an octave here. Oops, that was 2 octaves. There we go. And like the on-screen keyboard, you can click up here to change our octaves around. But you can't stretch this window like you can stretch the on-screen keyboard. But really, there's not a need to do that since you can only play an octave and a half at a time. Notice that you can type Z to go down an octave or X to go up an octave. This can be useful if you're playing a line that spans more than an octave and a half. It takes a little practice, but if you press Z or X at the right time, you can play a seamless line. For example, I'm going to type ADG over and over again, but each time I'm going to press the X button after I type G to go up an octave. And I can press Z to go back down. So it's not the most graceful way to play piano, but it can work for simple lines. But again, you are limited by just having an octave and a half. If I wanted to play a B major triad, I can't really do that on this keyboard. I can type J, P, and then I need an F sharp, but I have no more keys. I could play it down here with the T, but that inverts my chord, and that might not be the sound I'm going for. One of the many other limitations of using your Mac's keyboard as an instrument is that it can't tell how hard you're hitting the keys. As you saw with the on-screen keyboard, you can click the notes in different areas to change the velocity of the note. With musical typing, you have to press either C or V before you type the note to have it play either softer or louder, which is probably not the best way to play a passionate melody. Now we also have some other capabilities here, like pressing Tab will sustain the notes, like pressing the sustain pedal on a real piano. If you really practice, you might be able to wrap your brain around using your left pinky finger as your right foot for the sustain pedal. And finally, we have this top row of keys for controlling pitch bend and modulation. Pitch bend bends the note a full step up or down, and modulation adds vibrato, which is sort of like a fast, repetitive pitch bend that stays within the range of the note. Now, pitch bend and modulation are not effects that you can apply to just any instrument. For instance, they have no effect on the grand piano because you can't bend notes or play vibrato on a piano. But they will work on other instruments like guitars. So if I wanted to mimic the sound of sliding into a note, like from B flat to C, I would press B flat and then press 2 to bend the note up a whole step. And you can add up to 5 levels of modulation. It's kind of hard to hear with the guitar. Let's go over and try a synthesizer here. So I'll start with 3, which is off. Now I'm going to press 4 through 8, and you should be able to hear the differences in modulation. So anyway, that's GarageBand's musical typing feature. Again, it will work in a pinch for certain scenarios, but if you're serious about recording your music with softer instruments, you really need to go out and get a real MIDI keyboard that has actual piano keys on it. They're just so much more flexible and give you much more control than anything either the on-screen keyboard or musical typing can offer.